Okay. Right. So, hello. This
Hi.
this may turn out to be an historic moment. You never know. Anything's possible. This is the first recording for the new YouTube channel, desanitized, and
Yay.
and this is my guest Elena, and I'm Nigel, and today we're going to be talking about lockdowns and coronavirus and the global response to coronavirus. So,
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the honors of opening your future very popular podcast, Nigel.
oh,
It's
thanks.
it's a pleasure and a privilege
Yeah.
to be here and talk about this important subject for all of us.
Well, it's my. I feel honoured to have you on this actually, and I hope it does turn out to feel like an honour to be on this. Who knows? Anything's possible. So, so actually, I think we're in very strange time at the moment, aren't we?
Yes,
Yeah.
it, it is somewhat Kafkaesque.
Yeah. Well, to put it mildly. I mean, actually, I was thinking that never before in the history of Western democracies have basic human freedoms been taken away on this kind of scale. Not just for a few weeks, but I mean, coming up to almost an entire year now. Is that absolutely unprecedented?
Yes, it really is very interesting phenomenon on so many levels. Um, the this freedom erosion has been justified by artificially created panic in on mass scale, as I see it, which seems to have become a thing of its own. It just rolls and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, which is a pretty big discussion why that might have happened. You can tackle it from different angles.
Yeah.
I I'm particularly interested in behavioral psychology
Right.
angle of it. Although I'm far from being an expert, but
Mm,
I'm kind of looking increasingly
mm.
at it from that direction. I
Yeah.
know psychology is one of your interests, so
It
we
certainly
can
is. Yeah. Well, I
maybe
think
discuss
it
it
can only be
later.
explained like from a psychological. Well, I get, yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, to me, it can only be explained from that perspective because, yeah, I mean, that's what really kind of throws light on this, I think, isn't it? Why
Mm,
this is going on. But I mean, I mean, to me, what the amazing thing about it is that this whole sort of response to this pandemic. I mean, this has been for a virus that has a survival rate of people who catch it of something between 99.5 and 99.8%. I mean, that's just incredible. So I think it's not, we're not really sure exactly what the sort of case fatality rate is because we don't really know, how many people have actually been infected with COVID. But I think sort of reasonable estimates indicate that it could be between one in 500 people who catch it dying, between that and maybe 1 in 200. So that's if it's 1 in 500, that's 0.2%, which
mm.
gives you a sort of survival rate of like 99.8%. But I think almost worst case scenario, it could be 1 in 200 people that catch it die. Even that is just 0.5%. So even that gives you a survival rate of 99.5%.
But then all of
Yeah,
the numbers you're mentioning, it's what I call is the battle of statisticians or battle of
yeah, yeah, yeah,
statistics. Um,
yeah.
so somebody funnier than me said that if you torture data for long enough, it will confess to anything.
Yeah, right.
And it's true. It
Yeah,
all depends on how you twist the numbers.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yes, if you are set to prove a point,
Mm.
you can prove it for sure. But I see that the numbers are really meaningless at this stage for vast majority of ordinary people who
Right.
either support
Mm.
lockdowns
Yeah,
or completely reject them as well. Because
right.
I think to understand the behavioral phenomena
Mm.
of this process, we need to step right back and
Yeah.
and, and first simplify the issue
Mm.
completely, like completely strip it down. And if you completely strip it down, you will understand that we can't constantly reaffirm our stance on various issues.
Yeah.
So this situation is quite a complex issue, right? And it takes a lot of time, energy, thinking,
Yeah, right.
whilst you're making your mind where you stand on this.
Yeah, yeah.
It is unreasonable for anyone, unless you do it professionally for in some capacity, to constantly reassess your standpoint
Yeah.
on continuously. So therefore, at the same time,
Mm.
we also all as species have this very deep rooted evolutionary need to be consistent with our standpoint we've made, because once upon a time, not
Yeah.
so long ago on evolutionary scale, that this consistency was equal to survival, really, because your troop members needed to know who you are as a person, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we have this drive to be consistent with our previously declared traits, behaviors, standpoints.
Yeah, yeah.
And number two, it is extremely difficult to completely reassess your standpoint.
Mm.
So two of this together mean that once we spend the time and energy committing to this is what I believe in, this is
Yeah.
what I'm about, we are very unlikely to change that standpoint. And
Yeah.
every everything that comes at us thereafter is subjected to confirmation bias.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
You're going to see the data and see how you can disprove it if it disproves your beliefs.
Mm.
Where are the holes in that
Yeah,
data and that argument? How
yeah,
you can turn it around to confirm what you already believe in. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. So that's just kind of standard confirmation bias kind of thing that
Hmm.
I think that's kind of well understood, but I guess it's not really so much like I don't find it hard to understand why the general public, once they make up their mind, it's hard for them to change their mind. But actually, it's more sort of like policymakers or the decisions that are being made as to how to respond to this virus. Like there's less justification at that level, like to kind of just carry on blindly with the same policies. So, I mean, originally, we just didn't know what the sort of case fatality rate might be associated with coronavirus, and there was sort of estimates that it could be up to 2%, or some estimates even higher than that, like 5%. But actually, we do have the data now to know that it's definitely, almost definitely, no more than sort of like 0.5%, and in fact, it's more likely to be something like 0.2%. Right. So, given that knowledge, it, given that that is widely known and understood, then how it can therefore be justified to continue with this kind of policy of like locking down in the entire population, when actually the people that are at high risk, we understand like exactly who the people at high risk are. They're old people and people with underlying medical conditions, right? So how it can possibly be justified to deny the majority of the population who are not at risk, or okay, they might be at risk from this, but their risk is extremely low. I mean, I think for anyone sort of below the age of 50, the sort of level of risk associated with coronavirus is on a par with influenza. And in fact, for children,
Mm.
influenza is actually more dangerous for children than coronavirus. So, but yeah, so I mean, I just don't see how, given that understanding, how it can possibly be justified to sort of carry on with those policies, and how there's still this absolute fear as well that this is some incredibly dangerous virus.
Yeah, but that you're forgetting that large proportion of the population demands being locked down. It demands being locked down more.
Yeah, well, yeah.
In fact, even if government just and policymakers and decision makers just decided to beam, we're going to switch it all around. It
Yeah,
wouldn't
right.
be possible because it would cause huge unrest
Yeah.
in large majority of the population, I would think, or at least half of the population.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I,
this is because
yeah,
this beliefs now has been literally imprinted, like piped into our limbic
well,
system
yeah,
day after day after day, encoded on our subconscious level,
yeah, yeah.
to the extent that people are completely blinded to any facts that are thrown at them. And then next layer is what we discussed with you at some point. What against not my phrase, somebody else coined it. It's called convergent opportunism. Like everybody has tiny little advantages to gain from the situation
Mm,
on every level, from personal to corporate to governmental to intergovernmental level.
mm,
Everybody has tiny little gains, and I think we've gone so far in that direction now, then
mm.
that reversal of it is simply impossible. We just now have to find some sort of way to save the face, well, yeah, way to save the face
I mean,
at all
yeah,
costs.
I keep hearing this kind of term like, post-COVID world. And sort of the like the new, I mean, that's a term I absolutely hate, actually, like post-COVID world. And when I hear that, this kind of term, post-COVID world, I mean, basically kind of it sort of implies that after this pandemic, then it'll be much more common to sort of wear masks in public, and people will just be very paranoid about touching surfaces. I mean, I heard about like, well, actually, I mean, I've sort of seen various kind of proposals for work, like for airlines, for example, to develop contactless surfaces on aircraft and in airports. And yeah, I mean, there's all this kind of all these people now sort of developing concepts for contactless surfaces, and all this kind of stuff, and not to sort of to cope with the situation we're in
Mm,
now, but for this kind of post-COVID world that
mm,
people keep talking about. And I mean, I sort of like, but they sort of tout this idea as if it's a good thing, as if that's like a good thing that everyone might suddenly
mm,
become like really paranoid about touching things, and
mm,
sort of and regard
mm,
other human beings with sort of suspicion, sort of want to keep their distance from them because they're potential biohazards or whatever. And I
mm,
I kind of, yeah, I mean, that's what I find amazing, that it's kind of promoted as this is going to be a great thing, this post-COVID
mm,
world, like all the opportunities for developing sort of contactless surfaces. And and actually, this I was talking to this person who was telling me about this, like this work, for I don't know, for stuff for airlines, and I kind of said, well, I'm not convinced that there is going to be this post-COVID world, or if there is, I don't actually think. And he said, oh, really? And I said, well, yeah, no, because why? What once this pandemic has been resolved, then why is there going to be a need for contactless surfaces everywhere
mm,
and all this kind of stuff? And he seemed quite surprised that I kind of thought that there isn't going to be a need for this. Like, I just found that amazing. So it's like there does seem, like you say, there's this opportunism that's kind of
mm,
come about. People are thinking, right, okay, so we've got this pandemic now. So, how can we make money out of this pandemic? And then once the pandemic is like over, how can we make money then from sort of like maybe out, exploiting people's paranoias and fears that basically result,
Absolutely.
that result from people's kind of like greatly sort of, I guess it's like, people's like hypersensitivity, like that's it. It's sort of increased risk aversion. I mean, this is just
Mm,
basically inflating people's kind of risk aversion and a sort of
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's like a really bad thing actually, because I think people are, even prior to this COVID pandemic, I think in the Western world, people are kind of too risk averse already.
Mm,
Like, and this is just taking it to the next level of being utterly hypersensitive to risk, um,
mm.
which is really, really kind of damaging because yeah,
That's not a new thing though. I mean,
yeah,
fear sells. That has always been the case, and this has been exploited to control the populations or just simply
yeah,
sell us shit. I mean, marketeers have been exploiting this idea for
yeah,
centuries. There is a marketing term called pain points. So, in order to convince
yeah,
anybody
yeah,
to buy or
yeah,
sign up to anything, you have to find pain points of your potential clients and keep continuously pushing on those points,
yeah, yeah,
make them afraid of something. And the same goes to selling government policies. It's no different to marketing campaigns. It exploits the most basic psychological drivers that we have.
mm,
And that's what is happening. And this paranoia about germs,
mm,
again, it's not new.
no,
It has been present for a number of years
yeah,
amongst many people. And then where did it come from? It came from companies producing solutions for whatever germ issue, uh, antiseptic wipes, antibiotics, whatever, pushing their product, creating that fear, creating that need for their product.
yeah,
Uh, as an example, I have grown up in one of the Soviet bloc countries
mm.
where we had quite a different model of economy. And I had no idea what insurance is until I moved here.
Oh,
So,
really?
and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
lived in the UK for 20 years now, and I only just now got myself a contents insurance
Mm.
only 2 years
Really?
ago
Oh my God, yeah.
because because I had no idea I need to be afraid of those things.
God,
You
yeah.
see,
How could,
I've grown up with the beliefs that you just
yeah.
deal with shit as it happens,
All right.
because nobody told me that I need to be afraid of things and there are solutions for me to protect myself from them.
Yeah,
From them, you see the correlation.
yeah. But why did you? Yeah. No, but actually, so have you got anything that valuable in your flat then? I
Not
think.
really, but after
Why did you
20 years
bother?
of being told that I need to be very, very
Yeah.
afraid, and
Oh,
also a bit of peer pressure because everybody else has it.
yeah.
I
Because I see
thought,
you have a lot. I see you have a lot of books there, but I'm not sure the sort of people who go around stealing from flats tend not to be, of a literary inclination. I don't think. I don't.
I have few wooden bracelets as well.
You have
I'm
what?
not
Sorry.
sure. I have few wooden and plastic bracelets as well. So
Okay, yeah. So anyway, no, but I personally think insurance is an incredibly good idea, but so I think that's a little bit separate to. I think to some extent, well, I think actually, fear of germs is kind of natural to some extent. It's definitely a
hmm.
greater thing than it used to be, um, but that's maybe partly because we are more aware of like the risks posed by germs and whatnot. I mean, I know we all have
Yes,
immune
but
systems.
you're aware of it because you have been told
Right, yeah,
about it.
but I think it's natural to some extent for people to fear germs, but it's definitely but actually I don't think it's but people can be over paranoid about germs
No,
and I don't
absolutely. It
think
is natural for us to be afraid of germs, and it's natural for us to be afraid that your property can be burgled or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah,
But until you're told by somebody that
yeah,
you should be very afraid,
oh,
you should be afraid to an extent of buying antiseptic wipes or whatever it
yeah,
is you're being sold, or extra coverage on the insurance,
yeah, yeah,
you will not know how much fear you should be experiencing.
yeah, yeah. No, so do you think like I think it is kind of pertinent actually the fact that you come from Russia. I mean, do you think Russian people are less risk averse than British people, for example?
Oh, absolutely, for exactly that reason, because well, one of the reasons, because we didn't grow up in free economy,
Yeah,
where where we're constantly and continuously told to marketeers of all and policymakers of all sorts to be afraid of something. Well,
yeah,
we were being told to be afraid of the capitalism and the West,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's what we were afraid of. And if you think about it, it's exactly the same thing.
mm,
So fear of germs, fear of being burgled, fear of COVID, or fear
yeah,
of capitalism, they all developed along the same on the same basis of very basic psychological
yeah,
drivers.
yeah. But I think anyway, I mean, I think it's kind of rational to fear germs in some circumstances. So, for example, you know, if Ebola was on the rampage in Britain, I don't think I would be needing the government to tell me to stay in my home. I think I would like probably, yeah, I would do that of my own volition, I think, if there's suddenly been an outbreak of Ebola. But I find it kind
Mm,
of quite difficult to be afraid of a virus that I think for someone of my age is unlikely to have any more impact on me than a case of flu. And I don't live
mm.
in fear every winter of flu, so I'm kind of not quite sure why I should live in mortal fear of
Maybe
coronavirus.
you're not reading the right kind of press, or
Oh, yeah, I guess not.
or not watching the right kind of television channels. Let's not
To
name
be honest,
names.
yeah, I haven't been. But the thing is, I'm quite scrupulous about making sure I get like sort of relatively, well, yeah, so kind of information that's from reputable sources. So a lot of the
Mm,
stuff I've got on around coronavirus, I've got from the Office of National Statistics website, for
mm,
example. So that's not, they haven't got a, and yeah, so it's not as if they're a bunch of COVID deniers, right? These aren't
mm,
conspiracy theories. It's like the UK government ONS, but a lot of their data does not get promoted. I mean, if any of their data that doesn't fit the kind of hysteria narrative from the media
mm,
rarely gets talked about. So, for example, I already had heard that, but I found out recently. I checked on the UK ONS website what the statistics on the average age of death of people who've died with COVID. Right, this is with COVID. It's not just of COVID, and it's eight. Well, it depends. So basically, it's between 80 and 83%, depending on whether you take the median or the mean. So the median
mm,
age of death of people with coronavirus is actually I've just got to check here. Like I've got the median is 83, and then the mean is 80. So
mm,
whether you decide which of those average figures you decide to go for is a bit of a
mm,
kind of coin toss, really. But what we do know is that the average age of people dying of COVID is between 80 and 83. So I mean,
mm,
and the average life expectancy in the UK is 81.5. So I mean, that's yeah. I mean, that should give people pause for thought, actually. But
mm.
so that's from the ONS website. But how often does that get talked about, like on the media? Like almost never. I mean, extremely rare that gets. I don't think I've ever heard that mentioned on the BBC or on Channel 4. Not that I watch BBC or Channel 4 much nowadays, I must admit.
See, you see, maybe that's why you're not afraid enough.
Well, yeah, I guess it is. So yeah, I haven't been like watching enough like rampant hysteria. Basically, I need to get some more of that hysteria. I'm just not with the program, I guess. But but no,
Your
coming back to
fault.
this. I mean, coming back to this kind of like people's basic freedoms being taken away from them. Like, I mean, we got, we need to kind of just step back and look at this. I mean, this is like, yeah. I mean, if you said to people 1.5 years ago, so before this whole pandemic
Mm,
started, that that the whole population of the UK and most of the world for that matter would have like their basic human freedoms taken away from them, not just for like a few days or a couple of weeks, but like for the best part of a whole year, for the sake of a sort of some kind of pandemic. People would say, "Oh, what you mean? There's going to be something like Ebola virus, like because and that if you said no, 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 not for that, but for a virus that has a sort of that kills, well, that has a survival rate of between
mm,
99.5 and 99.8. People would think you're absolutely fucking insane. They would say, well, no way, like that's not going to happen for a virus that 99.8% of people survive. I mean, they would just think, people would say that that's insane. Like, but that is the situation we are now in, right? But most
mm,
people then seem to think that's kind of okay, like it's quite okay that all of our basic human rights have been taken away from us. Like,
mhm.
I mean, not all of them, but I mean, uh, many of our
Yeah,
most basic, well, yeah,
a lot.
well, yeah. I mean, we can't go. You're not even allowed to go around like other people's houses or flats, unless they're the one person that you've designated as your social support bubble. I mean, that's just like ridiculous. I mean, it's not just not being able to go to the pub and
Mm,
go to restaurants. Even that's terrible enough, right? Literally, you're not allowed to go around your friends'
mm.
houses, flats. That's just unbelievable. I mean, that's like on a par with, yeah. I mean, normally speaking, you would. I mean, even in, I'm sure, North Korea, people are probably allowed to go around each other's properties. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I think even in 1984, people are allowed to go around each other's flats, right? I don't think even George Orwell, when he wrote 1984, didn't imagine anything this bad. Like,
Yes, because you literally can't make it up, can you?
well, no, exactly. But I mean, I think we should talk about like the Great Barrington Declaration
Mm,
actually, because yeah, I mean, because that was when did that was back in the summer, wasn't it? So there was a professor from Stanford and a
yeah.
professor, I can't remember his name, and there was a professor from Oxford University, Sunitra Gupta.
Mm.
He was one of the people, and I don't know who else. Do you know who else was involved in that? You might know more about that than me, actually.
Uh, no, to be honest, I'm terrible with names, so I
Yeah,
won't be able to tell you who signed it. But I know that
yeah,
initially, when it became kind of known, there was around 600
yeah,
very well-known academics
yeah,
who signed it, and I think around 15,000 of medical workers,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think something like
right,
200,000 of concerned citizens. So 600 academics,
yeah,
like
yeah,
prominent academics
mm,
worldwide,
yeah,
is a serious number.
yeah,
We're talking immunologists, we're talking professors, we're talking world-class researchers.
yeah. And certainly the key people behind it. Like I think there was three or four key people that organized it all. And
Mm,
one of them was a professor from Stanford, I believe, an epidemiologist. One of them was our own Sunitra Gupta from Oxford
mm,
University, epidemiologist at Oxford
mm,
University, right? I mean, she's yeah, it doesn't get more prestigious than that. Stanford and Oxford, and
mm.
these are people with epidemiology professors, so
Mm.
they're not like history professors or whatever.
Well, it beats Sage.
What, sorry?
It beats Sage committee,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is made up primarily of statisticians,
yeah.
right? And
And also
behavioral
you've got,
scientists.
yeah, and then also you've got like Carl Hennigan, who's the he wasn't one of the people that organized the Great Barrington Declaration. I'm pretty sure he would have signed it though. But he's been like, I mean, he's from the Oxford Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, which is affiliated with Oxford University, right? This is
Mm,
like an incredibly sort of prestigious guy. He knows his stuff, and he's been pushing back on sort of lockdowns, like as in general lockdown that's applied to the whole population. He's been
mm,
pushing back on that, but I mean, he's very. But all those voices. I mean, Sunitra Gupta, from what I hear, I mean, she's gone quiet now. She's just stopped sort of appearing on like discussion shows or yeah, I mean, she's just gone completely quiet because I think she was just vilified, like
absolutely.
kind of like she probably got like death email, you know, threats by email. And
Mm,
I mean, she's just such a lovely woman. I mean, she's just, it's hard to imagine a more mild mannered, compassionate, decent
mm,
human being than her. Like, but, you know, she's been sort of like, you know, forced into silence basically by the sort
mm,
of like the mob, you know, just for sort of, yeah, I mean, I just think that's appalling. And so to me, though, like what I don't see what was wrong with like the strategy that was proposed by the Great Barrington Declaration, right, which was that to basically kind of shield the vulnerable groups and then let everyone else kind of carry on like as
mm,
normal. But obviously, if you know, maybe if people want to kind of do social distancing and like
mm,
constantly use hand sanitizer and wear masks, then let them do that. I mean, no one's going to stop people doing that, right?
mm,
Maybe you know, yeah. So yeah, you could have those kind of health measures in place, voluntary health measures for the you know for the large proportion of the population, and then shield those kind of at-risk groups, which is people over the age of 70 and
mm,
people with serious yeah, I mean that's what they proposed, and then they were kind of acute, and that to me, I don't see what's wrong with that. That just makes perfect sense because those are the people that are at risk. So they're the people that need to be protected. It doesn't make any sense to protect, you know, the whole population,
mm,
and also those groups of people. So people above 70, and also the I don't know people with underlying health conditions. They're well, certainly if you're talking about people above the age of 70, the vast majority of them are no longer economically active, right? So that's the other
mm,
thing as well. I mean, those people being shielded does not sort of cause the economy to grind to a halt because they're not out of work. They're not out
mm,
at work. So those people are not going to be losing their jobs or whatever because they don't work anyway. They're on their pensions, right?
mm.
So if you know, so I mean, yeah, so instead you kind of lock down the entire population. Um, that just is completely does not make sense at all, actually.
No, it is absolutely insane and it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't matter. And that these people have been shunned because they dared to speak against ideology.
Yeah, well,
And
that's
by that point in summer, we already were in the midst of this newly coined ideology. And it
yeah,
is such a powerful force, as I know from experience as
yeah,
somebody grown up in Soviet Union.
yeah,
You simply can't speak anything against it. You'll be destroyed by that force, and that's what exactly what
yeah.
happened.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's yeah, you're right. It's dogma, isn't it? It's the tyranny of dogma. It's
Hmm.
basically there's a new dogma that this COVID thing, which in reality, um, primarily only affects certain groups of the population. I mean, it can kill younger people, but so can
Hmm.
flu. I mean, every year, people in their
Hmm.
20s, 30s, you know, even sometimes people without any underlying health condition, sometimes they die of flu. It's just, you know, it's quite rare, but it does happen. So there have been cases of people in their 20s and 30s
Hmm.
who've died of COVID, and some of whom apparently didn't have any underlying health condition. I mean, it might be that they did have some underlying health condition, but it wasn't known about. But it could just
Yeah.
be, it could be that they didn't. But it's just like you know, shit happens, as they say. I mean, that's not to sound uncompassionate, but you know, but they're rare. Those events are rare, and then people, but
Hmm.
perfect young healthy people die of flu every year, and
Hmm.
again, those cases are rare, right? So, you know,
But
Yeah. So
that's a very problematic view at the moment, because this ideology that we're talking about is based on absolute sanctity of human life, any life whatsoever, to such an extent that even mentioning of death is no longer acceptable. It
yeah.
seems like concept of death is no longer acceptable.
Yeah.
Uh,
Just a
wow.
shame that all of us have to die eventually. Like they seem to be forgetting
Oh,
that.
really?
Well, they haven't managed to count. They've cancelled a lot of things, like they've cancelled people who disagree with them, but they haven't managed to cancel death yet. Like that's going to be a tough nut to crack.
I'm sure they're working on it right now. There is a
Oh,
vaccine for it somewhere.
they are working on it actually, but that's a whole nother. Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion. But no, this whole thing. But one of the arguments actually that was made, like as to why this whole Great Barrington Declaration was so awful, these people were just truly awful people, right?
Hmm.
Apparently, was because oh, this is just appalling discrimination. Like you're gonna kind of discriminate against people like being based on their age. So old people are gonna have to kind of stay locked down in their home
Mm-hmm.
whilst everyone else gets to sort of be free, So, and that's just appalling discrimination. So, but I mean, like how, so it's better to lock down the whole society instead. I mean, it's not, it doesn't make, that is just the most ridiculous argument because actually, yeah, I mean, because old people are not free now, are they? Right. So, like, it's just
No.
nobody's free. So it's not gonna. It wouldn't have been any worse for old people, right? That situation, because they're already locked down. It just yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have been any worse for them. I mean, that to me is the most stupid argument I could possibly. But that was like that's what people are saying. Oh, this is like yeah, actually, yeah, I mean, I've never heard a more absolutely, utterly stupid argument in my whole life, actually. But
I
it's,
agree.
yeah. And then the other argument, which is a more valid argument, actually, as to why that was a bad concept, was that some people made the argument that it would be impossible, it's not practicable. You couldn't do it. You couldn't sort of you couldn't effectively shield the vulnerable groups and let the rest of the people carry on as normal. That it just wouldn't be possible to do logistically, because there'd be too much coronavirus in the non-vulnerable population. So how would you be able to shield the vulnerable? But I mean, again,
Therefore, we are going to lock down the entire society
well,
because that is the
yeah.
piece of cake.
Well, the idea, yeah, well, yeah, exactly. As if it's so easy to kind of lock down the whole society. But the thing is, like, you know, I think it might have been like, I'm sure there would have been complexities and logistical issues around how do you shield a certain proportion of the population whilst not shielding everyone else. Like, how do you, but
Well,
it could have been done. It could have been done.
it
It's
is.
not,
Sorry, I'm interrupting
yeah,
because I think the solution is so simple. The
yeah,
solution is to treat people as if they are adults,
yeah, yeah,
perhaps, which means give them the information.
yeah,
Where we have all the technology to identify people who are vulnerable and contact them, their
yeah,
contact details on an NHS database,
yeah,
and then give them choice and support should they choose to shield.
yeah, yeah,
That's what civilized society should do. It should give people a choice
yeah.
and b support vulnerable if they choose to be supported, if they need support.
I
That's
think it would have
that's that simple.
logistically it could have been done. I mean, when you look at the billions that this lockdown, the billions that is cost, right? And the huge amount of money that's been spent actually in mitigations for the lockdown, not just including the billions. Yeah, I mean all the money that's been spent on furlough. I mean like literally billions and billions of pounds is just astronomical. You could have, with that same amount of money, you could literally have you could have put every single vulnerable person in a 5-star hotel, like behind. You could have built some sort of special kind of airlock thing so that
And wait for this.
yeah,
You could have allocated a personal trainer and nutritionist to each of these
yeah,
vulnerable people,
well,
so
yeah.
maybe they would become less vulnerable at
Well,
the end of it.
yeah, well, yeah, you're right. That's true, actually. But I honestly, I really think it could have been done. there would have been logistical issues. I don't deny it, but there's been massive logistical issues. Like, I mean, yeah, compared to locking down the whole of society, I think it would have been nothing, to be honest. Um, so yeah, but I want to come on to the issue of like the lives that have been lost as a result of lockdown versus the lives
Mm,
that have been saved, because this is like the kind of discussion, right? People, the discussion we hear is like people kind of say, well, you know, if you don't support lockdowns, that means that you kind of put the economy, you sort of, you think the economy is more important than people's lives.
mm,
And that is just such a like a, it's a false dichotomy, right? Because actually the the economy kind of tanking, not only is that just bad for people in general losing their jobs, and like, you know, I mean, it's not great losing your job
mm,
and being poor actually. You know, not only is that really terrible from this point of view of human flourishing and wealth,
mm,
but that also actually kills people. Like, you know, the economy tanking actually causes an increase in mortality, quite a significant increase in mortality, like over the
mm,
kind of, and it's not, yeah, I mean, in the short, medium, and long term, yeah, that causes an increase in death. So actually, lockdown itself, even if we sort of don't talk about like the economic impact, if we just purely look at it
mm.
in terms of how many people, you know, how many lives is the lockdown itself costing, right? And I don't think, you know, that's not being talked about much. It's certainly not being talked about in the mainstream media, right?
Well,
um
it certainly hasn't been mentioned that
yeah.
without economies there is no NHS.
Well, yeah, well, that's the other thing as well, because, you know, like, because actually, I don't think after we've come out of all this like fiasco, I don't think
Mm.
there's going to be a huge amount of money sloshing around in government actually to kind of spend
Oh,
on.
don't worry, we'll print some more.
Well, yeah, but I don't think something tells me that the NHS is not going to, like, it's not going to be swimming in money after all this in the post-COVID world. I got a feeling that it's not going to be that, yeah, it's going to be the, you know, the same business as usual. Basically, the NHS will be struggling along like it normally does. I'm struggling to cope with next year's flu season or what, or next year's COVID season. Or
As they have been every
well,
year
yeah,
since
exactly.
records began.
Yeah, yeah. But actually, I've been doing a bit of thinking about, like, you know, trying to sort of, well, so what could be the causes of the lives lost by lockdown, right? So, well,
Oh, how
actually,
much time do you have?
well, yeah, well, actually, I made a bunch of notes about what I think they could
Okay,
be,
go for it.
because what we hear a lot is that, you know, I think it's well understood that there's the obvious like causes of lives lost by lockdown, right? Which get talked about a lot, which is kind of delayed, you know, or just see it basically kind of tests, diagnoses for cardiovascular disease and cancer. So those kind of missed appointments for tests for
Mm,
those, and also increased suicide rate as well. So those are the kind of two things that are well, I guess, that are talked
mm,
about anyway, even in the mainstream media. But like, but there's also like a whole bunch of far less obvious ones, right? So which are kind of more associated with yeah, I guess the kind of the economic impact, really, like of people losing their livelihoods, and not just that, but the kind of isolation as well. So
mm,
the isolation that's caused, and then the economic impact, and then we've got to look at those lives lost, not just like the lives that have been lost already, but it's actually, we've got to
mm,
look at those from a point of view of the sort of medium and long term as well. So I just kind of put a list of the, you know, those, what those causes of death could be actually. So a lot of them, I think, kind of come down to what we could call kind of diseases of despair. So basically, like a drug and alcohol abuse actually
mm,
is a key one. So obviously, people, you know, suffering from social isolation or losing their livelihoods, that does tend to have a pretty negative effect on people. That's
mm,
quite likely to kind of cause people to turn to drugs and alcohol. And then that obviously has a sort of that causes deaths basically. You know, it could be drug overdoses, or it could just be kind of health impacts associated with becoming an alcoholic or like a drug addict. So there's that.
Mm.
There's also kind of pure, there's also sort of poor lifestyle choices as well. So, like, yeah, I mean, becoming unemployed, or and then the sort of the loss of self-esteem and all that can lead to kind of people living very kind of sedentary lives. Also, maybe overeating, comfort eating, stuff like that. So, you know, that could cause increase in like diabetes and obesity, stuff like that. And that, so yeah, and that kills people basically. And then you've got stress itself. So it's not just yes, obviously again, people losing their jobs, that causes a lot of
Mm.
stress. People being socially isolated from lockdowns, that causes a lot of
Mm.
stress. And stress itself actually directly increases people's chance of dying of either cancer or cardiovascular disease, right? I mean, that's well understood now. But
Absolutely.
yeah,
That's one of the major reasons why we're heading into absolute storm of multitude of chronic disease, which will
yeah,
flourish in the coming years, because stress and then emotions of sadness, of powerlessness, of
yeah,
social isolation as well are linked to just about every chronic disease that there is. You can
yeah,
make that correlation if you look at the data and at science. You will find that correlation because everything is interconnected. So
yeah,
we're heading in quite a worrying future, I think. We're already in this pandemic of variety of chronic diseases, autoimmune disease, cancers of all kinds, uh, various metabolic disorders like diabetes, like all varieties of cardiac issues, and you name it. They're going to go up considerably.
yeah.
What are we going to do about it with NHS, which is, as you say, will be continue to be underfunded as it has always been, and with empty coffers? I have no idea.
Yeah, so no, it's not, yeah, it's a pretty depressing picture you're painting there, but I think it's probably quite an accurate one, regrettably.
Yeah.
And then,
And on the other hand, I'm thinking if at least tiny fraction of this, whatever 500 billion that we just flushed down the drain, has been spent on preventative healthcare and education and empowerment of people and encouragement of people to take control
mm,
over their health, how different the world would have been right now.
yeah,
Very different, I should imagine.
mm. I think, yeah, maybe I think maybe it's one of the problems with living in a kind of nanny state, actually. I mean, let's face it, we
Mm.
do live in a nanny state. Let's call it a spade here, right? And that's probably another sort of kind of slight difference as well compared to Russia, I think, because I don't know, or maybe the Soviet Union had like aspects of nanny statism about it, didn't it? But it kind
Uh,
of,
yes, no, it did absolutely, because they were aiming to give people everything they needed to survive, like
yeah,
on basic level, in return for complete control.
mm,
So yeah, it was a nanny state as we are experiencing right now, or will experience very soon, when quite a large proportion of the population will be moved to some sort of universal basic income, I expect.
yeah. So no, so I'm just kind of thinking. I always kind of think of Russians as being quite tough people somehow. Like I guess, well, actually, after the Soviet Union collapsed, it was very much survival of the fittest, wasn't it, for a little
Yeah.
bit?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, but actually, so another, you mentioned autoimmune disease or whatever,
Mm.
but that was my additional item on my list of reasons why people, increase
Mm.
of death due to lockdown is chronic long-term, yeah, so chronic long-term stress associated with people losing their jobs or isolation associated
Mm.
with lockdown. That also kind of suppresses people's immune system. I mean, that is well understood
Mm.
now. that if you know, that stress over over a
Mm,
prolonged period suppresses your immune system. So
mm,
that will make people more sort of prone to infectious diseases, basically. So it'll make
mm,
people more likely to catch and die of things like influenza and and even
mm,
COVID. Like so,
mm.
so I mean that's
Really?
another yeah, and other respiratory disease. Yeah, I mean there's
Mm.
plenty of other respiratory disease as well. It'll increase people's chance of dying of those. So
Yes,
yeah,
but the
so
stress has effects on immune system in general. So it
yeah,
suppresses some branches of immune system and reduces our ability to fight off
yeah,
pathogens. But it also can create imbalances in other branches of immune system,
right,
making some of it overactive. So it starts attacking your own self
yeah,
and maybe start reacting to various otherwise harmless factors like certain foods that we eat or certain things that we breathe in
yeah,
all
yeah.
the time. So
Is that what you, when you refer to autoimmune disease, is that what you're talking about? Oh
uh,
shit, you've kind of frozen, unfortunately. This is a problem with technology. I'm going to pause the recording. Right, so yeah, so this thing, we had a bit of a technical issue there, folks. So if there's any glitch in this, like, don't worry. Like, we're
it's
new.
because we were discussing conspiracy theory of
Oh,
immune
oh
system.
God, yeah. This was, yeah, this was probably big tech kind of getting in the way. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a newbie. We're newbies at this whole YouTube thingy, so like, can't expect this to be that polished, I'm afraid. Yeah, but anyway, anyway, so there's all these kind of causes of death actually caused by lockdown,
Mm,
right? And it did, and they don't get talked about an awful lot, to be honest,
mm,
especially on the mainstream media, and you know, I think well, we just don't know how many of those deaths will be, you know, like in the sort of medium to long term. Actually, it's quite difficult to kind of estimate how many of those are going to be, but I really wouldn't surprise me if they turn out to be more than the actual number of lives that have been saved as a consequence of lockdown, right?
mm.
And
I
yeah,
call me pessimistic, but I have no doubt that
yeah,
we'll lose a lot more lives
yeah,
one way or the other related to
yeah.
lockdown than were saved.
And here's the real clincher, right? And this never gets talked about, but to me, this is a real clincher. Is that we need to kind of think about the number of years of life. It's not just the number of lives lost, right?
Mm,
It's the number of years of life lost as a
mm,
consequence of lockdown, right? Versus the number of years of life saved as a
mm.
consequence of lockdown, right?
Well, now you're drifting into completely unmentionable.
Yeah. Well, no, but so the thing is, like the average age of death of people who've
Mm,
died with COVID, we know this is like it's between 80 and 83, depending on which average you're talking about, right?
mm,
And then the average life expectancy in the UK is 81.5. So,
mm,
so on that basis, you know, the number of years of life lost from COVID is, you know, not so much as people might assume, right? But if we're
mm,
talking about people that might be dying as a consequence
mm,
of lockdown policies, we're not talking about, you know, we're talking right across the sort of age spectrum there. So we're talking about sort of teenagers who might commit
mm,
suicide. I mean, there's been a huge increase in suicide amongst teenagers and university students.
mm,
So you know, teenagers committing suicide. We're talking about sort of like people in their 20s and 30s who might sort of, well, some of them might, there could be suicide or there could be like other deaths of despair. So some of them, you know, maybe losing their livelihood. So
I
they, yeah,
Nigel, honestly, I've been talking to some people who
yeah,
would I would never ever consider being suicidal ever,
no,
and I know that they're having these thoughts because they may not have other choice.
yeah.
And we're talking professionals in their late 40s, early
Oh, really?
50s,
Really? Yeah.
just because something they've been doing for their entire career and their entire life, that industry has been wiped out. and so they're now spending what is left of their savings, and
Mm.
they're coming to the point where they'll have no choice but jump off.
Yeah.
It's terrifying,
So,
absolutely
yeah.
terrifying and heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, no, exactly. I mean, this is like, yeah, this is really a problem actually. Like, yeah, I mean, people are underestimating that, I think. And then, yeah, so people in their 20s, 30s, 40s who might be losing their livelihoods, like some of them might be committing suicide, others turning to drugs and alcohol, others, yeah. And then you got people, also you got like people in their 40s and 50s who may be are missing cancer, appointments that could have diagnosed cancer or
Mm,
cardiovascular disease. So actually, so right across the age, so these people dying, teenagers, like people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, dying prematurely
mm,
as a consequence of lockdown. Now you're talking about, if you're measuring the impact of lockdown in terms of number of years of life lost, that is massive. Like if you compare that to the number of years of life saved from lockdown, that is a massive. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to work out that when a
mm,
20-year-old dies, because of suicide, I mean, if the average life expectancy is 80, like that is
mm,
60 years of life lost. So if a
mm,
30-year-old like dies, maybe like, I don't know, drug overdose or something, like a death of
mm,
despair associated with
mm,
the fact that they become long-term unemployed,
mm,
that's 50 years of life lost, right? A 30-year-old. A
mm,
40-year-old who dies prematurely because of cardiovascular disease, that's 40 years of life lost. A 50-year-old who dies prematurely because he or she didn't
mm,
have their cancer diagnosis, that's
mm,
30 years of life lost. So,
mm,
it wouldn't surprise me that if you actually measure it in terms of the number of years of life lost as a consequence of lockdown
mm,
versus the number of years of life saved by lockdown, yeah,
mm,
I mean, the most conservative estimate must be that's at least 10 times as many years of
mm.
life lost as a consequence of lockdown than the years of life saved. That's a conservative estimate. It could even be like 100 to 1, the ratio, actually.
I really love how you dodged that bullet, Nigel. You got this years of life lost versus one life is more
Yeah.
valuable than another, and we
Well,
know that's not the argument. That's not a
yeah.
kind of semantics trap you can fall into.
Yeah. Well, that was, yeah, to be honest, yeah. So we both saw that thing, Law's Sumption, on BBC,
Yeah,
but
that's what
actually,
I'm
I mean,
referring to.
he didn't, I mean, he didn't do himself any favors. Like the way he phrased it, the way he framed it was not a very
Mm,
smart. I think he was deliberately being sort of like, maybe he doesn't suffer fools gladly, that guy. So he was being a
mm,
deliberately provocative, because yeah, I mean, because when you phrase it like that, like that life is less valuable, that's obviously
mm,
going to kind of just ruffle feathers. But I think if you kind of phrase it in terms of like the number of years of life lost, I mean, everybody knows deep down inside that when a 20-year-old dies, that when someone who's 80
mm,
or 80 or whatever dies, people don't, obviously that's kind of sad, but people don't look at that as a tragedy, right? People don't think, oh my god, a terrible tragedy, because everyone knows that once people get to about 80, that's like most people kind of die something around. And when someone dies when they're 20, people feel that sense of tragedy. It's awful, cut
mm,
died before their time. That's 60 years of life lost, really. Like everyone
mm,
knows deep down inside that's more tragic. So, but I think that's actually I think that's the metric we should use, to be honest. It should be the
mm,
number of years of life lost. um
mm,
and there hasn't been, I mean, they're definitely, the government have not made even the remotest attempt to kind of like calculate that or work that out in order to
mm,
do a proper cost benefit analysis of what are the
mm,
costs of lockdown. I don't just mean the costs economically in financial
mm,
terms. What are the costs in terms of years of life
mm,
lost of lockdown, not just in the short term now, but in the medium and long term?
mm,
What's the cost of that in terms of the benefit, in terms of years of life saved? And they definitely have not. That's a sort of like cost benefit
mm,
analysis to to weigh those two things up. They should have done that. Like, and they definitely haven't done that. Like, and I
Mm,
see, yeah, there's no justification for that. And what's really just truly awful actually is the fact that we're not allowed to have like a proper debate about all this. So like those scientists, you know, the Great Barrington people, Sunitra
mm,
Gupta, these are like highly acclaimed scientists, right? But
mm,
you know, they've been kind of silenced. People who support them have been accused of having blood on their hands, of being dangerous, spreading dangerous ideas, of
mm,
wanting to kill grannies. And you know, this is like, you know, so there's I can sort of respect people who argue that we need to have this kind of like complete lockdown. I don't agree with them,
mm,
but I respect their you know, their right to have their view and kind of express their view.
mm,
But you know, we should be allowed to have our view and express our view without, you know, being
mm,
accused of being like awful people that want to kill grannies or whatever. Like, and that's the problem. Like, you know, where we have this enforced, this is the whole problem with like lack of freedom of speech. You can't have a proper sort of functioning democracy if you don't have
mm.
freedom of speech, right? And this is like where we come back, and this is how ideologies and dogmas are allowed to kind of perpetuate themselves when people
Mm,
who question them get silenced, basically.
mm. Yes, and they
Yeah.
also get driven by emotional language and narrative
Oh,
like
yeah.
blood on your hands and
Yeah, yeah,
granny
yeah,
too,
exactly.
etc., etc.,
Yeah.
etc. So yeah.
The media have got a lot to answer for. They kind of stoke all of that. Like, you know, they use all that hyperbolic language actually. Like,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, it's really disappointing, like the mainstream media and the way they've just like really kind of, yeah, stoked the whole hysteria narrative and haven't given proper voice to the other side of the argument.
exactly, and we're back to right to the beginning of our discussion. Fear sells, and it doesn't
Yeah,
only apply to uh, disinfectant wipes. It also applies to news headlines.
yeah, yeah, no. So anyway, I think we better bring today's discussion to an end. It's certainly been very,
Yeah.
very enjoyable talking to you. I mean, it's not an enjoyable topic, but talking to you on this has been fascinating and enjoyable. And it's great to get your incredibly insightful perspectives on this, Ellen.
Absolutely. We should continue our discussion in
Yeah,
desanitized Freedom Cafe.
I think we will. Yeah, we'll definitely be doing some more of these discussions on this channel relating to I think we haven't finished everything we want to say about this COVID pandemic, actually. And so
Yes.
relating to this, but relating to many other topics as well.
Mm.
And I certainly look forward to doing that, having those discussions with you, Eleanor. And it's been
Likewise.
a pleasure. And let's hope this does turn out to be an historic moment.
I
Okay.
have no doubt.
Okay, well, take care and stay
You too.
sane. Not, you know, I'm sure you'll be safe, but try to stay sane. It's easier said than done in the current circumstance. Okay, good. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.